Dan, any more detailed developments on the questioning of Rebecca Brooks, such as when, for instance?
No, nothing yet, but there are developments on other fronts. We understand that there is going to be a statement in the House of Commons shortly from the Culture Secretary Chris Hunt about this takeover of B-Sky B by the parent company News Corp. As well, Scotland Yard has put out a statement saying, sort of criticising some of the media coverage as possibly undermining their attempts to investigate this. In addition to that, some opposition Labour MPs have been very strong in their criticism of the Prime Minister David Cameron. Chris Bryant, MP, was not mincing his words when talking about the Prime Minister's decision to hire the former News of the World editor Andy Coulson.
Well, either Cameron didn't ask the proper questions, or he's gullible, or frankly he did know from the beginning. And I've always been in the first camp, that he never asked the proper questions and was rather gullible, which incidentally makes it rather worrying when he has, world conversations with President Medvedev of Russia or whoever else. But I'm increasingly of the view that he must have known something, and he chose to suppress it, possibly because he thought it just related to celebrities and politicians from a different political party from his own. But I think in the end there's a big question of David Cameron's character.
I mean, this is obviously great political capital for the Labour Party, but it's a pretty serious allegation that he is suggesting there that the Prime Minister may have known about these phone hacking allegations when he hired Andy Coulson and decided that they weren't serious enough to prevent him from hiring the former tabloid editor, who has since been questioned by police for several hours on Friday. Also, some speculation going around online from the biographer of Rupert Murdoch that they are considering the kind of nuclear option of selling News International altogether, which would be an incredible development, something that we haven't corroborated ourselves, but that gives you an idea of just how serious this is. If this is even being speculated, that they could go that far as to completely dump News International from News Corp and get rid of it altogether in order to try and save the parent company. Pretty extraordinary times down here. Yeah,
no doubt about that. And the increasing pressure on the Murdoch empire shows no signs of abating. Over the weekend, some suspicions, speculations that this hacking could have gone beyond the UK and made its way to the US, involving 9/11 victims. What do we know? This is all uncorroborated at this point. What can you tell us?
Yeah, I mean, that's just one of the lines coming out today from a rival tabloid, the Daily Mirror, suggesting that News of the World journalists allegedly contacted a former New York policeman to try and glean phone numbers of the families of victims of 9/11. Another interesting line that the BBC are reporting in the last couple of hours are allegedly emails that were uncovered in 2007 by News International that clearly show that one of their reporters, Clive Goodman, a royal correspondent who since served time in prison, attempted to buy contacts of members of the royal family from police officers. It's difficult to see how this could get much more serious for them. Yeah, indeed. Dan Rivers joining us there from the House of Commons in London. We appreciate it. Thanks, Dan.
I've always said that I've just tried to write articles in a truthful way, and what better source of getting the truth is to listen to someone's messages.
You're not uncovering corruption. You're not uncovering, bringing down institutions that are inherently corrupt. You're finding out. You're just trying to find out who's sleeping with who.
Yeah, but it's about selling newspapers. Free press and a decent democracy. You need a free press.
You've nothing to do with a free press or a decent democracy.
Absolute garbage.
More damaging details are emerging in Rupert Murdoch's phone hacking scandal. For the first time, other News Corp properties are being implicated in the growing scandal. The UK's Guardian newspaper reports hackers working on behalf of Murdoch's Sunday Times and the Sun newspapers targeted former Prime Minister Gordon Brown's voicemail as well as his bank, medical, and legal records. Joining me now host of the Martin Bashir Show. Martin Bashir. Martin, this is tonight's story I know nothing about. I was out of the country all last week. I was in a former British colony, Malawi, in Africa, where they aren't really paying much attention to the Murdoch scandal. Right. Take me through this. What is the latest in it, and what is the most damaging elements that as we sit here tonight?
Basically, what emerged was that in 2004, Prince William, who's recently been in the United States, had a knee injury. And he had a phone conversation with a doctor that nobody else knew about. And it suddenly emerged that the story about his knee injury was in the News of the World newspaper. So the press office at Buckingham Palace made a complaint. And that was the start of an investigation which continued and continued, led by the Guardian newspaper, which over the last week has revealed that they hacked over 4,000 people's private voicemails on phones, home phones and mobile phones. And these included everybody from members of the royal family to the Prime Minister of the United Kingdom to a young girl, Millie Dowler, 13 years old, who disappeared. They hacked her phone and listened to cries of appeal from her parents. And then when the phone messages were full, they would delete the messages. And this led the police to believe that the young lady was alive. And eventually they found her dead body. It's also emerged that News of the World journalists hacked the phones of parents of deceased members of the armed forces in the United Kingdom who were killed in Afghanistan and Iraq.
What were they hoping to find in hacking those calls?
Well, obviously they were looking for information about families. They were looking for details about Millie Dowler. Did she disappear, this 13-year-old girl? Was she with a boyfriend somewhere? And so they had access.
And the number of people who would have to be involved in this exercise sounds pretty big.
And this is remarkable. In 2007, the managing director of the News of the World, who's now the managing director of the Wall Street Journal, Les Hinton, went before a House of Commons Select Committee and said there was one rogue reporter at the News of the World. It's now emerged that it was rife throughout the paper, that virtually everybody involved was hacking someone's phone for stories. And that's why Rupert Murdoch took the decision at the weekend to close that newspaper for good. That's a newspaper that's existed for 168 years. No more.
And the law on this in Britain?
Oh, it's a criminal offence.
Everything about it's criminal.
But what's worse is, it's now emerged that they also had financial relationships with serving police officers. So, for example, one individual, a member of Parliament, was discovered to be meeting men at a particular place called Clapham Common in South London, near where I used to live. But what happened was, he would be arrested by a police officer, and within 5 minutes, a News of the World journalist and photographer were on site. And
what is the jeopardy for Murdoch at this stage, personally?
Well, today, his shares lost about $3 billion. The biggest problem for
But if he can be found to have known about any of this, because owners of these newspapers, when they read them and they see some gold in there, they call up and say, hey, how'd you get that?
He has said that he knew absolutely nothing about any of this. If it's possible that he or his son, James Murdoch, knew and were involved. And remember, James Murdoch was asked by a House of Commons committee about whether he knew, and he said he didn't. If they did, then that places them in very serious jeopardy, in effect perjury.
Martin Bashir, thank you very much for bringing me up to date on the story I know nothing about. You can see Martin Bashir every weekday on MSNBC at 3 p.m. Eastern. Again, Martin, thanks for joining me tonight.
Thank you.
The final edition of Rupert Murdoch's News of the World went to press yesterday, but the phone hacking scandal that brought down the British tabloid isn't going away. The Daily Mirror reported that News of the World tried to bribe a New York City police officer to get private phone records of 9/11 victims. The officer says he turned down the bribe at the time. Former UK Prime Minister Gordon Brown was also a target of News Corporation hackers. According to The Guardian, journalists working for various News Corp papers illegally obtained Brown's medical, banking, and phone records, including medical data on his infant son. So the News Corp hacking scandal now extends to the royals, top politicians, war casualties, victims of terrorism, victims of murder, and family members of them all. The developments threaten Murdoch's takeover of British Sky Broadcasting and hurt his bottom line. The News Corp stock price fell 7% today and is down 13% over the past 5 days. A group of shareholders announced a lawsuit against the company claiming the scandal has diluted the stock value, and the company could face criminal prosecution here in the United States. The Justice Department stepped up enforcement of anti-bribery laws in the past 2 years, and legal experts say News Corp's actions could lead to similar probes. Joining me tonight is Robert Greenwald, president of Brave New Foundation and director of the landmark documentary Outfoxed: Rupert Murdoch's War on Journalism. Robert, good to have you with us tonight. Did you know something? I'm sorry I'm laughing, but I mean, you can't outdo this one, can you? You don't have a documentary that can outdo this one, do you?
No, this is greater than any storyline we could come up with or any fiction story.
I mean, do you think it runs deep in this country as well?
Well, I think it's systemic in the way Murdoch runs his operation. And what we must remember is it's all about power. And in the pursuit of power, which they then use on politicians, which they then use to improve their bottom line, they literally, Ed, will do anything. Which why I think it's important that there be an investigation. Crew and Media Matters and others are calling for an investigation. And I think it's important we support that. And wouldn't it be the ultimate irony, Ed, if they were brought down for wiretapping 9/11 victims after Fox has abused 9/11 so horribly in their pursuit of a political agenda?
And of course they were so upset because a mosque was going to be built just blocks from the tragedy of 9/11. I find it amazing.
Yes.
Could this bring Murdoch down?
Well, we don't know. I mean, this has gone so beyond where anybody thought it would be, and it's growing. It's growing abroad. It's growing here, and we will see more and more evidence as people turn, because the more people internally talk about Fox News, the more they realize that their necks are on the line, that they're not going to be defended legally, and hopefully, Ed, more of them will come to their senses morally. What a horrible thing to work for a newspaper, to call yourself a journalist, and to engage in this wiretapping.
Well, you know what I find interesting, Mr. Greenwald, is that journalists call themselves journalists who work for Mr. Murdoch. Don't you think that they'd be coming out in droves right now saying, I'm going to protect my integrity and my profession. I have had nothing to do with any of these kind of tactics. I mean, I think the silence is deafening. What do you think?
Well, I think it's really tragic, and when we did Outfoxed, which now seems like 1,000 years ago, Ed, we were contacted by journalists and writers and producers working at Fox News who felt it important to talk to us, but they did it in disguise because they were afraid for their jobs. But what we're seeing, not just at Fox, but unfortunately all over the country, is really this question of how much are you willing to sacrifice in the pursuit of the bottom line?
And what about
will you do to profit your company?
And what about the Justice Department? What do you think is going to happen there? And do you think Congress is going to be looking into this?
Well, we sure hope so. As I said, Newshounds and Crew and Media Matters are all asking for an investigation. Free Press has pointed out this is what happens when you have media consolidation. And I think we've all forgotten for a moment, Ed, how much extraordinary power one man has over all of our lives.
Pretty amazing. Robert Greenwald, great to have you with us tonight. Thanks so much.